webcast to our what has become a tradition. This is now the 7th or so annual privacy conference that we have held. Over the years, we have explored topics including internet privacy law, privacy in the press, the economics of privacy, the technology of privacy, and privacy harm. And this year, we wanted to go in a little bit of a different direction and talk about the future of advertising and how privacy law and policy should respond. And the usual approach to conferences like this is to have a set of assumptions about how the advertising industry works or will work, and then to proceed into a food fight about privacy law and regulation. And we at Silicon Flatirons are interested in taking a longer view and grappling more carefully with some of these ideas. And so we thought it would be interesting to step back in this moment, and I think especially given the number of hot takes on various issues in the last several weeks, and have a deliberate conversation about where the advertising industry is. What's going on with advertising? What are the assumptions and the models that have changed over the last 5 to 10 years? And then with a better understanding of those changes, approach the conversation about privacy in a more sophisticated way. So we're going to have 2 panels with which to do that. There'll be plenty of time for audience Q&A at the end of each panel. Then we'll have breaks between each panel, so there'll be plenty of time for networking. And of course, there will be a reception to follow. Please join the conversation on Twitter. The hashtag is hashtag SiliconFlatirons. Don't use flatirons, so that's like pictures of the flatirons and people at like hairdressers conferences. It really happens. We've got an overload there. So hashtag SiliconFlatirons. Let me say a few thanks. First, we have got a really amazing lineup of speakers from government, industry, and academia, many of whom have traveled a long way to be here. So we are so grateful to you guys. I want to thank my colleagues on the faculty here at the university, Jill Dupre and Harry Surden, who are kindly volunteered to moderate today. For those that got to experience the amazing pre-conference seminar, thank you to Deb Howitt and Dale Skivington for putting that together. I need to acknowledge our emeritus conference director, Paul Ohm, who's not here today, but here in spirit. His building of this program at Silicon Flatirons over the years that he was here is the real basis for so much of what we do, and I'm really grateful to him for his mentorship and his inspiration. I want to thank the sponsors that are listed in the program for all their support, and the amazing Silicon Flatirons team. So Anna Noskazy, Kelly Brown, Sean Diamond, Susanna Weller, Sarah Schnittgrund, and of course our illustrious leader Phil Weiser, who we hope is coming back from Australia soon. We will see. No, he'll be back in January, so we're looking forward to his return. And then lastly, I want to say thank you to our students. So can the students in the room raise your hands? So we have an amazing number of students. So if you are not in law school, you may not be familiar with what today is. And today is the last day of class, which means Monday is the first day of finals. So we have an amazing crew of folks who are dedicated and excited to these issues enough to come be a part of this conversation right before finals. And that's really typical of the level of excitement and engagement that they bring. They've contributed to volunteering for the event. They advocate for the public interest on these kind of issues in our Tech Law and Policy Clinic. They publish a lot of scholarship on these issues in our Technology Law Journal. They compete on our national championship telecom moot court and transactional technology competition teams. They educate and support each other through our Silicon Flatirons student group. They take part in our various employment accelerator programs and are doing a lot of public service and social justice work. So I am really inspired by them. Please, if you are not a student, take the time to engage with them during the breaks, talks to them. They are so excited about these issues. They are so excited to talk to you. Please hire them if you are looking for motivated, both law students and engineers. We've got folks from the engineering school as well as here at the law school and also our information sciences department. So if you are looking for really smart folks, whether it's here in Boulder, here out in DC or elsewhere, they are awesome. So talk to them about that, talk to me about that. And of course, the long-standing Silicon Flatirons tradition, the Phil Weiser rule, the students at the end of each panel will get the first question. All right, and they will be cold called, of course, if no one volunteers, and I know who you all are. All right, so normally we will refer you to the program for background on our speakers, but I will break that rule just at the beginning here to introduce our really amazing keynote speaker, Lori Craner, who does all sorts of amazing things from her base of operations at Carnegie Mellon, where she is a professor of computer science and engineering and public policy. She's the director of the Scilab Usable Privacy and Security Laboratory, and she focuses on usable privacy and security as well as technology and public policy. And she's on loan from Carnegie Mellon to the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, where she serves as the chief technologist. She's also a leader in password-related textiles, including her very famous password dress and password quilt, which I encourage you to look up if you've not heard of them. In her own words, she is a password researcher, fashion idol, and badass cyber feminist, which I think is underselling the case. Today she's going to give us a keynote about contemporary ad tech. So please join me in welcoming Lori Craner. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be back here in Boulder. It's always fun coming out to the Silicon Flatirons. So today I'm going to give you something I guess is more of a tutorial than a typical keynote, but I'm going to try to keep it interesting and hopefully have a little bit of something for everyone here. And please do ask questions. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different types of advertising. Then we're going to talk about how web tracking works with cookies, and I'm going to break it down for you for kind of exactly what goes on behind the scenes, but without getting too technical. Then we'll talk a bit about web tracking beyond cookies and tracking beyond the web, and we'll talk a bit about opting out. So let's get started. So the most basic kind of advertising is contextual advertising. So here we have ads that appear on the page. They're pretty much the same for every user. If you are at a photography website, it's not surprising that you would have ads for camera equipment. If you are at a search engine and you do a search for funny t-shirts, you're going to get ads for funny t-shirts. Right? So those are directly related to the content that the user is viewing. We also have run-of-network ads. These are ads that just appear everywhere. So on the week of Black Friday, there were Black Friday ads everywhere. It didn't matter what website you went to, Black Friday ads. They weren't targeting me in particular. Everybody was seeing Black Friday ads. And then we have targeted ads. So this ad was targeted for me. And they sort of got it right. My kids are like, oh yeah, old. So those are the ads where they actually are using information about the kinds of websites that you've visited in the past, and any kind of demographic information they've been able to glean, and they target you with ads which are supposedly things that people who look at the kind of websites you look at and have those kind of demographics would be likely to be interested in. Then we have retargeted ads. And these are the ads that appear because of something you looked at, usually on a e-commerce website. And I think shoe companies are kind of the typical example of this. I plead guilty. I buy a lot of shoes online. And anytime I look at shoes online, and it doesn't matter which retailer it's at, those shoes follow me around the internet for several days. And just without fail. So I'm always seeing shoe ads. And apparently a lot of other people are also seeing shoe ads. This is talked about a lot. People are constantly saying, oh, those shoe ads, I can't get rid of them. I heard a piece on NPR about this woman who had once looked at these really ugly sandals, and she said, oh, the most awful, ugly sandals in the world are following me around the internet. And actually, you can turn that off, but apparently most of the world doesn't know how to do this, and they just complain about it. Okay, so those are the main kind of types of targeting that you might see. So let's talk about the technology that enables all of this and makes it possible. So a bunch of different things we're going to run through. We're going to talk about cookies. We're going to talk about third-party cookies, ad exchanges, cookie syncing. That's a fun topic. Other identifiers that are used for tracking, cross-device tracking, and probabilistic tracking. So it's a lot to cover, but I have nice little pictures, so follow along. Okay, so before we can even get to cookies, we need to back up and look at how content is delivered on the web. And so it uses a protocol called the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP. Right, so if you have a web browser and you want to get a web page from a web server, your web browser will make a request to the web server, and it uses its little computer language, but it makes a request, and the web server will send back the content. That's the basic what's going on. Okay, but web pages actually have lots of components to them. So here's the front page in the New York Times, and I've put blue boxes over all of the other components on that page. So when your web browser makes a request to the New York Times, it only gets back the part that's not covered in blue boxes, right? And then it has to make separate requests for all the things that have blue boxes on them here. And so basically it goes through, and your web browser goes through and analyzes that page, and it looks for all of the stuff that's embedded into it, and it goes and makes a whole bunch of other requests. So it's making all these requests to web servers to get that other content, and even things that you don't even see. So there are these invisible things, which are called web bugs or pixels or beacons, right? And it's making requests for those also. And then the servers respond, and all of a sudden, these objects appear on your page. Except this all happens really fast, so most of the time, you don't even notice them appearing. Although if you have a really slow internet connection, you might notice that the images are loading after the rest of the content. And then there's that web bug, and nothing actually appears there because it's invisible. Okay, so that is kind of the normal process that you have. What's actually in those requests that your web browser is sending to the web servers? Well, it first of all has to tell the web server what content you want. You know, do you want the front page or do you want the sports page? What is it that you actually want? So it's going to send that information. If you typed any information into a form or a search engine, that text is going to be sent as well. It's also going to send what's known as the referring website. And that's the website that you click the link on to get to the web page that you're at now. So kind of the site you were at before. It's going to send all sorts of information about your user agent, which is your web browser, or in some cases maybe your email program, because you might have clicked in a link in email. And it's going to send information about your platform, so the type of computer you have, the operating system. Is it a Mac? Is it Windows? What version? Things like that. It may send information about your user agent and your device. So what is the default language that you're expecting content to be in? What fonts can it display? What plugins are you running? And it will send cookies, and we're going to go into detail about what exactly that is. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like. Your web browser sends what's known as a GET request, and so you can see here in between the syntax of the GET request, we see section/sports. So this user wants the sports page, and so that's what they'll get. The next request actually is a specific article that's on the sports page, and so you can see there's the information which helps the web server know exactly which article you want to see. And if you have done a search, then you're going to see, okay, this person searched for women's soccer, and so that request is going to the web server. Okay, the referrer, as I mentioned, if you click on a link, then your web browser is going to send the page that link was in when you clicked. What also happens, though, is that when I go to a website and it's loading all this other content, then the base page into which that content is loaded is going to be the referrer that gets sent. So when I'm loading all of those images or ads or whatnot, they know where they're being loaded into. And so your referrer might look something like this with everything, including the search query or whatever you've put into a form on that page. And so that has the potential of leaking information that you might not want leaked to a third party. It also, though, is very useful for these third parties in helping them target the content to you, whether it's advertising or even actually widgets or things like that. Knowing information about the page you're coming from can be useful. So there's a service called Panopticlick, and I'll show you more of this later. But this can actually show you what is being sent by your web browser to websites. And so this, I ran this on my browser last week, and this is all the information that my web browser is sending to every website that I visit. And I didn't ask it to send all this stuff. It's just what it does. And you can see it's actually a lot of information, including the whole list of fonts that my web browser knows about. And those are actually fairly unique. Turns out we all have different fonts depending on what we've installed on our computers. And there's all sorts of details about exactly which version of all the software that's running and which plugins I have and what screen size is being displayed and things like that. Okay, so cookies. Why do we have cookies? The basic reason we have cookies is to help what's called maintain state as we move around a website. So every one of those GET requests to a website is a standalone thing. You ask for something, the website sends you back something. Now you go and ask for something else, it sends you back something else. There's nothing to connect these two requests. They're completely independent, unrelated requests. Now, if you ask for something and then put something into your shopping cart and then ask for something else and put something else in your shopping cart, you kind of want the first thing you put in your shopping cart to still be there when the second thing gets added to it. And so there has to be a way of connecting these different interactions. And cookies are a way that you can do that. It's also useful, let's say you're filling out a form. And you type in your name and your address and a bunch of stuff, and then you say next, and you go to the next page, you answer a bunch of other questions. You don't want to have to type your name and address again. You expect that the form remembers that from the previous page. It's another thing that a cookie can help make sure works. You also may have preferences. When I go to a particular website the first time, I tell it that I would like the website to be in English, not Spanish. Next time I come back, I don't want to have to set that again. I want it to know, always just serve me that website in English, don't ask me again. It may be a website that I have an account with, I've stored some data, and sort of the quick and dirty way of recognizing users is with a cookie. And you may notice that there are websites that actually will recognize you right away when you come back. If you want to do anything that actually exposes any of your information, you then have to log in. A well-done website is not going to trust the cookie to expose your information, but they'll trust the cookie enough to greet you by name and pull up some of your preferences. So that's why we have cookies. How do they work? So a cookie stores a small string of characters on your computer. And so basically what happens is when you go to a website on the first visit, your browser makes that request. And when the website sends content back, it says, hey, please store this cookie. And then your web browser stores that cookie. Next time you go back to that very same website, your web browser will automatically send it back to the website. And so if the website hands a different cookie to every visitor, then it can recognize those visitors and connect the dots between their various transactions. Okay. By default, when a website sets a cookie, it lasts forever. But cookies can have expiry. And in fact, most websites actually do set up cookies to expire after a year, after 5 years, after 20 years, which is effectively forever because nobody keeps a computer for 20 years. You can also set cookies to expire like tomorrow or a week later, or you can set cookies to be what's known as a session cookie, which says when you close that browser, delete the cookie. You can also have cookies that are restricted to certain parts of a website. So you could have a website say, we're going to set this cookie, and it should only be sent back whenever the user opens an article, say, in the sports section, not anywhere on the website. Like, this is just a sports section cookie. Or if you have a company that has many computers, so you have news.newyorktimes.com and advertising.newyorktimes.com and comics.newyork, whatever, right? You could say, well, we only want this cookie to be sent back when the user visits certain of the computers on our network, not all of them. So there are various restrictions that can be built into the cookies. The cookies also contain some content. And there's kind of two ways that websites deal with cookie content. One way is that they take all that content and they actually stuff it in the cookie. So we know your username, we know your email address, we know something about your visitor ID, and they'll just plop that right there in the cookie. Often they'll encrypt it. So if you look at your cookie, you'll see it looks like gobbledygook, but it's the content of what the website knows about you. The other approach is that the website gives you a user ID, and they just put the user ID in the cookie. Now, sometimes people say, oh, that's much better. They're not storing information about me. They're just storing a user ID. Well, actually, they probably have a database on their server that's storing all the information about you, and the user ID is what they need to go look that up. So from a privacy perspective, there's actually not a huge difference in which way that goes, but that's just two different approaches that can be taken. Now, if you want to see what's inside your cookies, you can. All of the web browsers have ways of doing it. It's different with every web browser. This is how it's done in Chrome. And so you can actually go to your Chrome settings, and you can look at your advanced settings, and then you can click on, what is this, content, and then you click on that, and then you can look at all cookies and site data. And then finally, you get a list of all the cookies that are being stored in your web browser. And for each website, you can see all the cookies. So at the New York Times, I have 15 cookies that have been stored. And then I can go pick any one of these cookies and click on that. And then I can see the details. So here I can see that this cookie will be sent anywhere on the New York Times website. And it expires, it looks like, November 17th, 2017. So that's a one-year cookie. It had been set that day, and it expires a year later. So, oh, and you can see the content of the cookie just looks like a bunch of gobbledygook. So I don't know exactly what it is they're storing in that cookie. Okay. And then if I decide, you know what, I really don't want the New York Times to recognize me anymore, well, I can go and delete that cookie. And if I want to, I can actually remove all of my cookies. If you click that, it actually will immediately remove all of your cookies. I tried it just for the purpose of preparing this presentation and was actually surprised that it didn't ask me to confirm. So they're gone. So what happens when your cookies are deleted? So let's go back and look again at these HTTP interactions. So the first time you visit a new website, your browser sends a request. The web server sends back the content and a new cookie. The second time you visit a website, your web browser automatically sends that cookie, and then the website sends back content. Now let's say you go and delete your cookies. Okay, so now you go and visit the website again, but you don't have a cookie to send it, so you just send a request, no cookie, and now the website is going to set a new cookie because it doesn't know who you are. You might as well be a brand new user, sends a new cookie. Now, there are exceptions to that. There are ways that they can actually figure out who you are anyway, but in the most basic case, they don't know who you are. You get a brand new cookie. All right, so another thing that's important to know about cookies is something known as the same origin policy, which I must say is different than single origin, which applies to coffee. But I once wrote a paper with a student where we accidentally wrote single origin all the way through, and it got published that way. And nobody noticed until later that it is actually same origin. Okay, so the same origin policy says that your web browser is only allowed to send the cookie back to the website where it originated. So a cookie from x.com can only be sent back to x.com, and a cookie from y.com can only be sent back to y.com. It's not allowed for the cookies to be sent to other websites. This restriction is designed to make sure that websites can't track you across the internet. And this was something that the people who wrote the HTTP standard and the cookie policy way back 30 years ago, I don't remember exactly how many, about 30 years ago, they said, hey, people don't want to be tracked this way. We're not going to allow this. And so that was by design. But there are all sorts of reasons why different companies want to track you across the internet. And it turns out there are actually all sorts of ways to work around the same origin policy restriction. So the simplest way to work around it is by using third-party cookies. So when you visit the New York Times, as I showed you before, you make a request to the New York Times, and they send you back a New York Times cookie. But on this page, there's all sorts of other things that we talked about, and some of them are probably New York Times content, like the photographs and the little crossword puzzle widget and things like that. And those are probably on the New York Times own server or one of the servers on their network. But there are also advertisements up there. And those advertisements are coming from somewhere else. And so there may be some advertising server that is sending those advertisements and setting cookies. And there may be some of those invisible pixel trackers that are coming from some other company. And I just made up these names. It's not really what they are. And so they each have their own cookies that are being set. This set of purple cookies, I show the same cookie because you'll see that those ads are actually all from the same advertiser. It's a set that came together. OK, so those cookies that are not from the New York Times, those are called third-party cookies. Now, the New York Times can't set those cookies, but they can be set with those images or advertisements, right? Because they're making a request to a different web server that's not the New York Times web server. So to show you an example, let's say I go to the New York Times, I get a New York Times cookie. I go to Parents Magazine, I get a Parents Magazine cookie. But the New York Times and Parents Magazine, they use the same advertising company, and so I have a cookie from ads.com that gets sent back to both of those web pages. And so ads.com is now aware that I visited these two websites. Oh, and there are pixel trackers too, so track.com is also aware that I visited those two websites. That's OK. But then I actually was clicking on parents, and I found something really interesting about pregnancy-related stress, and that's actually maybe not something I want to share with the world. That maybe is sensitive medical-related information. But that page, of course, has ads as well. And so now that information is shared and may be attached to my profile. And then I decide to subscribe to Parents Magazine, and I actually type in my postal address. And so now Parents knows who I am. Before I was just some anonymous user who went there. And there might be a tracker on that page. And so it's possible that that tracker knows who I am. Now, that depends on what Parents decides to give the tracker. Parents could say, hey, we're not sharing any information. The only thing the tracker knows is that you subscribed. We still don't know who you are. Or there could be an agreement where that information gets shared. OK, so this is all pretty complicated. See all the cookies flying around in arrows. But wait, it's actually even more complicated. This was just totally oversimplified. And I'm going to fill in a little bit more of the detail, but it's still going to be overly simplified because it's really, really much, much more complicated. So the thing is that when you make a request for an ad, and they have this profile about you, and so they want to give you an ad that you might actually be interested in, well, there's only so many ads that any one ad company has. And what they'd really like to do is to have a view into the whole universe of ads that they might serve you and find the best ad to serve you and the one that's going to make the advertisers the most money. And so they actually have an auction in real time to decide which ad to serve to you. So what actually happens is that the ad server gets the cookie. So it now knows your user ID from the cookie. And it sends it to what's known as an ad exchange. And the ad exchange is an organization that runs these advertising auctions. Okay, and the ad exchange then sends your user ID and information about the website that wants to serve an ad to all of these demand-side platforms that have lots of different ad inventory, and they hold an auction. And they have real-time bidding, and they ask all these different platforms, how much are you willing to pay to provide an ad to this user? And they all come up with their bids really fast. And the price and the ID of the winning ad get sent back to the ad server, and the ad appears on your screen. And amazingly, this all happens in less than a third of a second. So that's pretty cool. And there are lots of players in this game. They said this is the simplified version of it. Like here's a map that somebody made of all the players in this ecosystem. Yeah, it's crazy. There are lots and lots of them. And the other thing, though, is that I still have it too overly simplified because I showed you all of these different companies bidding on this one user based on the user's cookie. But the thing is, that cookie is with one company. It's not with all of these different companies. So these companies actually don't know who that user is. And so they need a way of syncing their cookies together so that they all know who this user is based on that one cookie. And so we have cookie syncing. My kids really like that. All right. So, cookie syncing. So, every website has its own cookie. And because of that same origin policy, they can't cross their cookies. Right? So, they're going to use this thing called cookie syncing, and I'm going to show you in a minute, that is going to allow them to figure out that this cookie from one site goes to the same user as this other cookie from another site. This technique can also be used to respawn cookies if a user goes and deletes their cookies. And you say, wait, how did the cookie reappear? I deleted them all. They can use variations on this technique actually to respawn those cookies. And not to say that all websites do that. They don't, but some of them do. OK, so here's how cookie syncing works. So your web browser goes to a web page, and there's some content from a.com, so it makes a request to a.com. And a.com sends a cookie. And then you make a request to b.com. b.com sends a cookie. And you make a request to c.com, and c.com sends a cookie. OK, so then you go back to a page where they want to place an ad, and they want to go to an auction. So A, B, and C all want to bid in the auction, and they all need to know who you are. So they've all decided to cooperate here, and your web browser sends your cookie to a.com. And A sends back a message to your browser that says, redirect to another website. And whenever your browser gets a redirect request, it goes ahead and does that. And so it says, oh, a.com is telling me to go to b.com. OK, I will. But in that redirect request, a.com has embedded your cookie ID. So it says redirect to b.com, and oh, by the way, the cookie ID is A123. So now your web browser dutifully goes to b.com, and it says, here I am, and the ID is A123, and here's my cookie. And b.com says, oh, interesting. OK, well, I'm going to redirect you to c.com. And so we redirect to C.com, and B.com has embedded A's cookie and B's cookie in that redirect message. And so now your browser goes ahead and sends a request to C.com along with A's cookie and B's cookie and its own cookie. And now C.com knows that A123 is the same user as B678, and that's the same user as C789. Right? And we've now succeeded in syncing these cookies, and C can send messages back to A and B so that they all know all of this too if it wants to. So once the cookies are synced, the companies can exchange data with each other, and they can also do it behind the scenes. Now they don't even have to wait for you to come and send all these cookies around. They actually know how to sync up this data, and they can send messages, and we don't even know what they're sending behind the scenes and what information they're now storing in merge profiles. So that's a pretty powerful tool that enables all sorts of things to actually work in this advertising ecosystem. Okay. So let's move beyond cookies. There are lots of other ways besides cookies that websites and advertisers might identify you. So one thing is your IP address. So you always have an IP address when you're connected to the internet. Is it unique? Not always. You may be set up on a system where everybody in your house has the same IP address. Or if your house is a dorm or an apartment building, you might have a lot of people with the same IP address, maybe. Or your ISP might periodically change your IP address, so it might not be there forever. But it turns out that for most users, their IP address is pretty identifying, and it lasts pretty much a long time. So IP address is a reasonably good way of identifying people, and you always get it, and it's not blocked. There are some anonymity tools that can hide it, but it's actually a pretty reliable thing to use to identify people. There are also things that are kind of like cookies that are not called cookies that are on computers and web browsers, and those were put in place generally so that various plugins on your computer, like Flash, could store data that they needed to run. So, if you're using Adobe Flash and you play games and you want data about your high score in the game and things like that stored, then in that Flash storage, that information can get stored. But it turns out you can use them basically like a cookie. And it used to be that when you deleted cookies, none of that would get deleted, and users had no clue that any of this was going on. So it was kind of a workaround for companies that didn't want their cookies to be deleted to have a sneaky way of, even if you deleted their cookie, they still actually had a cookie on your computer. There's also within the HTML5 specification, there are ways you can store data as well. There's also some kind of tricky things. Your web browser uses something called a cache, so it doesn't have to keep requesting the same content, and especially images, over and over again. Once you have the logos for a website, we don't have to, they're not changing. You don't need to keep downloading them. You can just store them on your computer. So there are ways that you can actually manipulate that cache and use it like a cookie. There's also JavaScript, which runs on a lot of web pages to actually make the website do more interesting things and be interactive. And there are ways of using that also to store identifiers, to actually peek at what websites you visited, and to get what's known as a fingerprint of your web browser. So even if you block cookies, lots of ways you can still be tracked. Browser fingerprinting basically is just taking all of the information that can be gleaned from your web browser and using that to build an ID. And it turns out that if you just look at things like what the combination of fonts and how big your screen is, that's actually fairly unique. And you can either completely uniquely identify people or come pretty close. And if you use that Panopticlick website, you can actually go there, click that Test Me button, and find out how unique your web browser is. So I tried it last week, and my web browser was unique among the last 186,000 people who tried this. They periodically reset it. It used to be a much higher number. So it may be that there's somebody else out there who has exactly the same combination of plugins and fonts installed in their browser, but among the last 186,000 people who visited Panopticlick, they didn't find anybody else with exactly that combination. So chances are, if a website was just using this fingerprinting technique, they have a unique ID on me, and deleting cookies is not going to do any good. If I wanted to get around this, I would actually have to use tools that prevented my web browser from sending some of this information to the websites. Okay, so we can also look at tracking beyond the web. So on our mobile devices, there are also ways that we can be tracked. So all of the mobile operating systems have IDs that can be used for tracking. And these are used to target ads, to retarget ads, to do something what's known as frequency capping, so that they only play the same ad to you a certain number of times and they switch to a different ad. That can all be done using these mobile advertising IDs. And it works a little bit differently depending on whether you're using Android or iOS or Windows, but they all work basically the same way. They all have the ability to have the user reset them, which was something that was added relatively recently as a privacy improvement. So a user can say, hey, don't remember me anymore. Here's a new version of me. They also have settings that let you limit ad tracking. I think that actually that's a little bit misleading. They actually limit ad targeting. They're still tracking you, but they're not using it to target ads. So this is an evolving area, and I expect it's going to continue to evolve. We also have, on mobile devices, apps are very eager to learn your location. I would say actually even on the regular web, they're eager to learn your location, but there's even more reason they want to know your location with a mobile app, because as you're walking around with that phone in your hand, you might be walking by a store or a restaurant or whatnot that wants to immediately target you with an ad. So there are a bunch of different ways that apps are able to get your location on your phone. And some of them are kind of the proper ways that go through the normal channels. And when you say, don't share my location, that gets shut off. That's great. But there are also some kind of behind-the-scenes ways that some apps are using to get your location. And when you turn off your location, they're still getting your location through these behind-the-scenes ways. And you will not be notified that they're getting your location. And sometimes this comes to the attention of the FTC. And some companies get investigated for this. So, there's a lot of things that apps can actually get by putting together information in unexpected ways. And so they can use that to get your location. There's some that are known to be in use. There's some that are in research papers. We don't know of any companies actually doing them. So one of my colleagues at Carnegie Mellon a few years ago realized that all mobile phones have something that's known as an accelerometer in them. And so that way, if you turn your phone, it's aware of how you're moving your device. So it turns out that if you drive around with your phone on the seat of your car, that accelerometer is collecting data. And my colleague was able to actually take that data, run it through all sorts of complicated formulas, and draw the path you just drove. And then he did a search of maps to find streets of that shape on the map, and then locate you. Okay, I don't know of any companies that are actually doing this, but it's actually feasible that it could be done using this accelerometer data, which was never intended to be used in that way. And so we increasingly keep finding these sorts of things where data from your device is used in ways that people hadn't anticipated that it would be used. Another way that your location is used on your mobile device is inside retail settings. So inside a shopping mall, inside a large store, they want to know where exactly you are in the store. And there are a variety of different ways that they can do that. One of the common ways is that most people have their phones set up to constantly be searching to see if there is any free Wi-Fi available that they can get on. And every time your phone goes and looks for Wi-Fi, behind the scenes, it's actually making a request that includes a unique identifier called a MAC address. And you don't even know that it's happening. It's not just when you pick up your phone and say, is there Wi-Fi? It's just constantly doing that sort of thing unless you turn it off. And so in retail stores, they use this to actually track where you are inside the store. And there's ways you can opt out of that. All right, so we've covered the web, we've covered mobile, but what if we want to link the web and mobile and other things like, say, your TV? So that's the new thing, is cross-device tracking, where companies want to know that the user who uses this phone is the same user who uses this laptop, who's the same user who uses this smart TV. So how do they do that? And there are a lot of reasons why you might actually be happy about this. If you start watching a video on your laptop and then you have to go and you're standing in line somewhere, wouldn't it be nice if you could just hit play on your phone and pick up the movie where you left off? Right? So there are a lot of useful reasons that you'd like this to be mapped. But it's also the case that advertisers think this is a really good idea. You may or may not think it's a good idea, but they want to do it. So there are a few different ways that this can be linked together. One is a deterministic way where you actually go and log in and identify yourself. And then they know for sure. If you use your Google account on your phone and also on your laptop, then Google knows you're the same person on both devices. So Google, Facebook, those are two companies that actually have the ability to track you in lots of places because you're going to log in and identify yourself to those companies. But there are a lot of other companies that don't have that kind of direct relationship with a user, and it's not going to be able to get them to log in like that. And so they use something known as probabilistic identification, where they look for other features where they can figure out that with a high probability, you are in fact the same user. And so they're going to look at some of the things we talked about before, like IP address. They're going to look at patterns in your browsing, what websites you visit, and they may be able to come up with a good guess that you're likely the same person and link those profiles together. There are also ways that websites can actually assist with this. So if websites have trackers from these advertising companies embedded in their sites, the websites could just tell them who everybody is. But usually the websites say, hey, we don't share personally identifiable information with advertisers. Like, we're not going to do that. So instead, they take that information and they hash it. Right? So they basically, it's like they encrypt it. That way, they're not giving out personally identifiable information, but the advertising companies can link this together and know it's the same person. That still could potentially get you into trouble. But all right, so another approach, and this is relatively recent, is audio beacons. And this is especially used for linking between smart TVs and other devices. And the idea here is that in the advertisements that are played on your TV, they embed some inaudible sounds. You can't hear them, but your phone can hear them, and maybe your dog can hear them, I'm not sure. So your phone is sitting there in your pocket, you're watching TV, and your phone goes, well, listen, I hear that sound, okay. And now your phone and your TV are able to realize you are the same person watching both of these, using both of these devices. So this is something, it's not widely done, but we're starting to see that being done. And there are definitely some questions raised about what kind of notice that you need to give consumers when you're doing this and what is an adequate form of notice. We also have advertisers who would like to know if their advertisement online successfully got you to go buy something in the real world. So you see this advertisements for Tide online. Do you walk into a Target or a Walmart or whatever and buy a bottle of Tide? Right? They want to be able to make this link. And so, again, what they will often do is that the advertising companies and the retailers will exchange hashed user IDs so that they can do a match and find out whether somebody in a retail store, whether that ID matches any of the IDs to which the advertisement was shown in the past week. So that's how they can actually track you in both locations, even if you haven't necessarily logged in. I mean, you don't walk into a store and log in. So. All right, so we have all this tracking, and some people say, I don't want it, I want to turn it off, I want to stop it. So what can you do? Well, the industry has come up with something called an opt-out cookie. And the idea is that if you ask for an opt-out cookie, instead of setting a cookie with a unique ID, you set a cookie that says opt-out. And that signals to the website, stop sending me new cookies and stop identifying me, I'm opted out. So it's a pretty simple use of cookies. If you go and delete your cookies, though, your opt-out cookies get deleted too. And then next time you go to the website, it's just going to set brand new cookies there. The other problem with opt-out cookies is that in order for them to be effective, you actually need one from every advertising company. Just setting one opt-out cookie isn't enough. So fortunately, there are also industry associations that have compiled together lots of opt-out cookies, so you can go to their website, and if you can figure out how to use it, which is actually not that simple, I'll give you a hint. You click on that check mark, click there, and then you go to this website, and it will check for what cookies you have in your web browser, and it will go through and find them, and then it will try to set opt-out cookies for as many of them as possible. And sometimes you get lucky and you opt out of most of them, and sometimes you get a message back saying that actually the opt-out isn't working today or whatever, which seems to happen to me when I try it. But in theory, this should opt you out of a lot of cookies. You could also wait until you see an ad that's tracking you and opt out then. And so the industry has come up with this icon, this ad choices icon, which is supposed to signal to you when you see it on an ad that you can opt out of being tracked or opt out of targeted advertising if you click on it. And if you do click on it, you'll get some information. It will tell you, the name of the company and what type of tracking they're doing. And you can see this little opt-out box. And sometimes you'll see, associated with an ad, there might be like 5 or 6 different companies that are tracking you, and you can click all those boxes and opt out. And you can also read more about the ad choices program. Tells you about how you can take control. And they also have an app choices that tell you about, so you can do this on your mobile apps as well. So this came out like about 6 years ago. And one of the things in my research lab at Carnegie Mellon, we do a lot of privacy research. And we noticed that nobody that we would talk to in our research had any idea what this ad choices icon was. And so we decided to do a study to find out what people thought when they saw it. So we did a large online study with about 1,500 people. And what we did is we showed everybody in the study the New York Times website, and it had some of these icons on it. And to start with, we just asked them if they saw anything on this page that was related to privacy. And the vast majority of people said no. And then we actually drew their attention to an ad with the icon and with a tagline next to it. And we asked them a bunch of questions about what they thought it meant. Now, we tried 2 different icons. So this is the real ad choices icon. And then this is another one that is not actually used, but it was one that had been considered at some point. But as far as I know, it's never actually been used. And we also tried a bunch of different taglines that you could put next to that icon, but ad choices is what is usually put there. So what we found was actually kind of disturbing. We asked people what they thought would happen if they click. Yeah. Yeah, so more than half of the people, when we put the word ad choices next to the icon, more than half of the people thought more ads would pop up and therefore would never actually click on that icon. And almost half of them thought it was like a your ads here kind of thing, where you could buy ads on the website. And only 27% correctly said that it will take you a page where you can opt out of tailored ads. Now, when we tried the other taglines, we found you can actually do better than this. So instead of 27% correct, you can actually get 50% correct if you put configure ad preferences. That's something that was more meaningful to people. Now, 50% is still not like great, but it's like twice as good. So, and this was just one study where we the first like 5 different taglines we came up with, we tested. So you can imagine that if there was interest in improving this icon and tagline, there is some room for improvement that the industry might be able to do. Now, some people have said, well, your study was a few years ago, and maybe it was biased. Well, other people have done studies since. In 2015, there was the Kelly Scott Madison Agency did a study, and they found that only 26% of Americans are familiar with the Ad Choices campaign, and only 9% knew what the icon meant. And then there was another study in 2015 that found that only 37% were aware of the icon, and they didn't say how many knew what it meant. So this is not by any means well known. Now, there's another effort to help people opt out. There's an effort called Do Not Track. This is a proposed standard from the W3C Standards Organization, and the idea is that your web browser will signal to websites that you don't want to be tracked. This has been in the works for many, many years. It is not yet done, although most web browsers have that checkbox. At most websites, you can check the box, but it really won't do anything. We'll see whether this actually emerges. There are also lots of different types of ad blockers that people are using, and cookie blockers and things like that. There was a study recently that asked people why they were using these things, and I thought it was interesting. So 64% of people said they find ads annoying and intrusive. 54% said that they disrupt what I'm doing. 39% said that they had security concerns, and there are actually ads that inadvertently put malware on your computer, so that is actually a valid concern. 36% of people were worried that ads were slowing down their page. 33% said they were getting offensive or inappropriate ads. 32% had privacy concerns. We also had people who were concerned about the amount of data they were using up, or they didn't like businesses making money off of them by selling ads, or they had other ideological reasons for not wanting ads. So lots of reasons. You can see that people don't like ads for many reasons, and so they are motivated to use all sorts of tools to try to block them. On the other hand, the content companies don't want this blocked because they make money by having ads on their page. And so they fight back and they say, well, we're not going to show you content unless you unblock the ads. And we have kind of an arms race here between the ad and content companies and these ad blockers and cookie blockers, and it's not quite clear where this is going to go. I want to close, though, by showing you something which I ran into yesterday. So perhaps all this web-based advertising, people are blocking it. So, when you go to the bathroom and you want to wash your hands, well, there's one more opportunity to advertise to you. And I actually saw this at the museum in Washington, D.C. yesterday. And I really hope this is not the future of advertising. So I will end it there, and I'm happy to take your questions. Hi, Parker.
All right. So earlier in your talk, you had spoken a little bit about different ways that you could constrain cookies as an advertiser. Are there any incentives for advertisers to do that?
Yeah, so the reasons that not just advertisers but any kind of website might want to constrain cookies are either because it's too much information. They don't, if a company has a lot of cookies, like I worked for AT&T in a former life, and we once did like an inventory of cookies in the company, and we owned like 500 cookies, right? You don't want anytime a user goes to any AT&T website to have like 500 cookies being sent back at you. So that's one reason to constrain it. The other is that if you've made a privacy pledge saying that you are not going to mix certain types of data, you're not going to associate, some data is anonymous and or pseudonymous, you're not going to associate that with personal information. If you have a cookie associated with personal information sent back together with a cookie that is not associated with personal information, you risk mixing that. And so you might want to be careful not to do that.
Thank you.
So I will confess that I was one of the people that I had no idea what the AdSense icon was until I saw that on the slide. I guess other than maybe changing the tagline, what can be done to, I guess, increase consumer awareness that you have these options to opt out of this kind of tracking?
Yeah, well, so I think changing the tagline would clearly help. But I think you could also have like public service announcements, right? I mean, this is the ad industry. They're supposed to be good at raising awareness about things. And in fact, they do have some of these kind of PSAs. If you go on their website, they've got the cute little videos about it. But I have never actually seen any ads with that in the wild. And I do unblock my ads so that I can be aware of these things. I have my web browser where everything's blocked and my web browser where it's not blocked, so I can kind of see what's going on. And I have never actually seen that play. So they say it's playing somewhere. I'm sure it is, but it could be played more widely, maybe.
Hi there. Are you seeing any organizations, any companies that are actually working with consumers to monetize that ad data, where they're offering back to consumers some percentage of that advertising revenue for them?
Yeah, I have seen a bunch of startups come and go that are trying to do that. Where basically they will give you a cut, or it's actually not very much money, for any one consumer. It's a lot of money for all the consumers. And so I've seen some that say rather than giving it to you, it will donate to a charity of your choice or something like that, which can add up more. So I've seen that model. I don't know of any company that has been overwhelmingly successful with that model, but it's something people are trying.
Thanks for taking the time to travel. I know how hard that is, so thank you. Great talk. Why do you think the narrative of this is negative? Why do you think that it's like, oh, ad blocking is required because this is bad, that people are tracking you and giving you advertising that could be relevant to you? Because I'd argue that the majority of people don't use ad blockers, and if you did that same survey, they're like, hey, I like getting that shoe ad that tracks me for weeks. I'm just interested, does that ever come up in your world?
Yeah. So we've done work where we just come in and say, what do you think about ads, and get people's reactions. I would say that the number of people who actually are enthusiastic about ads is actually pretty small. But there are definitely people who don't care, right? That they're not opposed to it. They're not going to bother blocking them. They just don't care. A lot of them will say, I never really look at them. If they want to sit there in my computer screen, fine. I just ignore them. That's fine. I think that there are people who appreciate a targeted ad instead of an ad for something that they don't care about. But I don't think ad targeting is actually all that good for the most part. So even when we're getting ads targeted to us, we're getting crappy ads. And people are like, if that's the best you can do, I don't need it. It's kind of ironic, if we could target really well and be more privacy invasive, like that might in some ways make people happier, but other people would be like, no, that's super creepy, don't do that, right? So I think that's kind of a problem. But I think on top of that, if you looked at that survey data, more people were concerned about the other bad things about ads than the tracking. They were concerned about slowing down their bandwidth, they were concerned about security, they were concerned about ads just being annoying because they like blink and make sounds on your screen. And so some of it is just the ad industry, I think, doing bad practices. And if they would, kind of clean up their act and have more tasteful ads and actually security controls to make sure they're not dropping malware on people, I think that would actually help a lot. Some people are still not going to want to be tracked, but I think that would reduce the concern for a lot of people.
Yeah, as a follow-up to Darren's question, have you done any studies about whether the general public understands that if they're not willing to watch ads, they got to pay for the content? NBC or HBO?
Yeah, so I haven't done that particular study, but I've seen studies that have kind of got at that, and it's really difficult to get people to think about that trade-off because it's kind of like not their reality. They're used to, the web being free, and if you say, well, how much would you pay? People are like, but I don't have to pay, so why should I? And I know people who rant about not wanting to be tracked, and they block ads, and then they know all the workarounds so that they can get the content for free anyway. And they're like, see, I didn't have to pay. So it's really hard. There definitely people have said, the solution is simple. Let's just charge, a price on all this content, and it will be fine. But it's actually not that simple.
Starting a trend here following the previous two questions. So one of the things you talked about was actually like, I think the New York Times basically says, you've got Ghostery turned on, please turn it off if you want to read my content. How well is that working as far as selective ad blocking? Do you have any data on that?
I don't have data, and that's something I would really like data on. I've been talking to Ghostery about, maybe there's some research that could be done to understand that better. I have questions about how well users even understand selective ad blocking, and are users just turning off that on that site, or are users just disabling it altogether? I mean, we've seen some evidence that users really don't, for the most part, understand how to do this, and once they start turning something off, they turn off way too much, and they think they're blocking, and then they're not. And so I don't really know, but it's a really good question. Okay, I'll check that out.
Yes, a quick question. So it's my understanding that self-regulatory guidelines like the DAA, NAI, et cetera, kind of govern how a lot of online advertisers perform and kind of conduct their business. Do you see the FTC kind of moving more into that to kind of set more guidelines or kind of maybe even regulations, et cetera?
Well, certainly not for the rest of this year. The FTC got a letter from Congress suggesting that we be careful what we do lest they undo it. But yeah, I don't know. I think for the most part, the FTC is basically just working within the FTC Act and interpreting the FTC Act here, as opposed to saying, these are the rules to go beyond it. I mean, the FTC has issued some guidance for advertisers, but probably, I would be surprised if we saw much more in the near future.
Awesome presentation. So, word about logistics now. One of our favorite parts of the conference. We'll take a short break. Feel free to adjourn next door for networking. We'll have some snacks. Please be back here sharp at 2:30 when we'll start with our first panel. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Can we